Now, the Civil Service Code demands political impartiality from our Whitehall mandarins. However, one Home Office insider has told GB News that staff have been openly relishing the prospect of a Starmer government, attending pro-Palestine rallies and even advocating for violence against Nigel Farage. Well, our US correspondent Stephen Edginton has got hold of this story. And Stephen, this is your story. What exactly have they told you?
Well, Tom, it's not just one Home Office civil servant. Actually, two Home Office civil servants got in contact with me to tell GB News that their colleagues have called for violence against Nigel Farage. And I can't specify the type of violence, but it's incredibly serious to the extent I would say it's criminal. But I'm concerned about protecting my sources. It is incredibly extraordinary that Home Office civil servants discuss openly this kind of intimidation. Not only do they talk about violence against Mr. Farage, but also in one case, civil servants were discussing arresting him. They described the Reform Party as an extremist far-right group. Now, many people will say, well, how do we know if this is true? Now, of course, I'm relying on sources in the Home Office that I've known. I've done a lot of reporting over the years on the civil service. I know many, many people within government, within various departments, and I am 100% certain that this happened. And I know that these colleagues in the Home Office said these incredibly controversial, to the point that, as I said earlier, perhaps even criminal comments internally.
Now, Stephen, some people might say that the Home Office employs thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people. Not everyone is in a critical role. Some people are in fairly menial roles. Some are not anything to do with policy or indeed anything operational at all. How seriously should we be taking this if it turns out to be low level?
I think we should be taking it seriously. The people that I know in the Home Office work in migration policy and on migration issues. And this is very relevant to the Reform Party, to Nigel Farage. Obviously, they're very skeptical of immigration. And the argument the Reform makes, by the way, is, look, we need to replace much of the Home Office because they are working against the interests of the British people, particularly on this issue of immigration. And I think this story only goes to confirm many people's suspicions that the people who run the Home Office don't believe in the government's priorities, and in some cases are actively trying to frustrate the will of the government and the will, frankly, of the British people when it comes to migration. And that's partly, perhaps, explains why immigration has been so high in recent years.
Stephen, when people today talk about the civil service resisting government policy or use words akin to some sort of deep state, as the United States might say, or in this country, perhaps institutional resistance, they're talked of as if they're sort of cranks or loonies or completely out of the mainstream. And yet, I seem to remember there was a rather popular BBC sitcom in the 1980s that was describing exactly that, the institutional resistance of the civil service. Indeed, we get the phrase Sir Humphrey from the wonderful series. Why do you think it is that it used to be so politically acceptable to talk about civil service resistance to elected government policy, and now it's seen as something that is fringe, that is odd?
Because of politics. And the people who are criticising the civil service now tend to come from more conservative backgrounds, particularly in the United States, where you've got Donald Trump talking about the deep state. And this has been linked with President Trump, and leftists and sort of more mainstream media types. They see anything that President Trump says and they connect it as some kind of conspiracy theory or some sort of outrageous thing to say. I think in the UK, there's no doubt in my mind that there are civil servants, senior and junior and middle, who are trying to frustrate ministers. Having said all that, to explain the dysfunctionality of the Home Office, I don't want to abdicate responsibility from ministers who have in many ways only fueled all of these problems that I've been talking about in terms of immigration and many other policy issues. They don't clamp down in many cases on the civil servants in their department, even with ministers who one would suspect are more hardline on these things, at least openly, people like Suella Braverman. They weren't successful at sort of reining in their department. Now, you could say that that's because that's the way the Home Office is run, but I think there's some really critical kind of criticisms you can make of Suella Braverman and other Tory ministers over the years. So Yes, I think this is clearly happening. As I said, look, I've been doing reporting on this for many years now. It's not a conspiracy theory. And this latest example is one of many where civil servants feel open in the office to express their extreme, what I would call far left political beliefs without any fear of being slapped down by their bosses or by ministers, frankly.
Well, Stephen Edginton, thank you so much for bringing us that story. Some fairly shocking findings there. Must say a Home Office spokesman has said in response, as the public would rightly expect, our day-to-day operations have continued in line with pre-election guidance, and it would be incorrect to suggest otherwise. The Home Office 50,000 staff abide by the Civil Service Code and continue to work on existing government policy and operations in line with published pre-election guidance.